And welcome again. This is Philip at thebest3d.com, and today we'll start a new series, a new collection of tutorials, and all focused on animation. What I want to talk about is many different types of animation. I've seen a request on one of the YouTube videos from somebody who's a new user of PD Howler. And the question is kind of vague, how to do an animation, a fly over, or fly through, or something like that. And that brings to mind that there are really many different scenarios. Even something like this static image, if you were to produce 2 or 3 images at slightly different orientation, different size, different maybe shifted position, you could take it into an animation of this sort with just a couple of frames, and then take it into something a little bit more sophisticated, and perhaps even using the motion prediction module to transform, and then after that to crop, create an animation that looks fairly decent. There's a little bit of distortion, but barely visible at normal size. I was zoomed in there. So that's one type of animation. There's lots of others, and I think we just need to learn some of these animation tools as we go along. But since we just kind of came from that River Canyon tutorial, and the request initially was specifically about flying over or flyover pretty much, I think my first tutorial in this series is going to be taking that river canyon and actually flying over it, and then also flying through it. So let's start from something that we want to create, our river canyon for, or canyon lands. I'm going to take something relatively small, just so we can do the animations, the renderings in the animation at still a reasonable quality, but still get going pretty quickly. So I'm going to go with 640 by something like 360. There you go. Fairly small, but if your final animation is going to be even smaller, this is going to do just fine. So we have a recap here. Basically, put some plasma noise. Remember that we actually before that also used the right-click here linear gradient tool to perhaps carve a little bit of a canyon and put that in the mode that's the multiply mode, so we can carve another one. That's not a canyon yet, but it's going to be a slope that we use along. Let's do one more here. I've never done it this way, where it's really kind of isolating a big peak, and we could then take the render and add some plasma noise, but change the mode to difference mode. So now we see that canyon going along the centigrade. Oh my goodness, scratchy voice here today. I went to the movies yesterday, see The Hobbit. I must have picked up something. Always happens. You go to where there's the crowds, and they share. So anyway, great movie, by the way. Anyway, when we have this canyon, we can go and store that, and then go straight into River Canyon. Where is it? 3D Designer. And in 3D Designer, remember a couple of steps. We need kind of a bluish sky. We need the sunlight to go down a little bit. So altitude down, zenith far away, brightness up so we still see it. Add some cloud, not this one here. Let's add some ray trace, soft shadows. There you go. So as we rotate the light source, we see those shadows. And let's say we want the light to come from the upper left, a little bit higher, like this. We can also add a little bit of ambient light from the sky now, altitude way up, zenith right in the center on top of the scene. And then, of course, open more and add some erosion. There it is. And add some sediments, and add some texture, and let it snow. We've done this, you know all this. Let's add some snow coloring on the sentiments. Oh, you know what? Actually, I think I really like this gray. Let's keep it a mix of both. Let's see if we can give it A little bit less on this, a little bit less on that. Compare one more time with the snow. Maybe we can get a middle ground with a little bit more grass. There you go, and still lots in the snowpack. Okay, so we got this. We've got some fog down in the ground fog. There you go. We might have some clouds. Let's add some clouds. These are too bright. Let's go reduce the brightness of those. Let's make them a little bit smaller. And also make them go farther away. Back in the background there. Something like this. Down a little bit. There. And so now we're going to do two types of animations. One is going to be as seen from the top. So when we go like this, see it from the top, that's when we say, well, maybe we can move the clouds a little bit different location and also move them up, something like this. So as we move the camera, we'll see those clouds move faster because they're closer to us. Let's see if we can do this one more time. Kind of really close. Still too bright. There you go. Let's see if we make it full size again. Okay, so that's one initial scene, right? Initial setting. You can adjust the position a little bit. And then the question is, well, how do we animate this? Right, so let's go cancel. I mean, we could go do a render here just to see that. and then say, that's clearly alpha. Let's undo that. There it is. Let's store this. Oh, we have a stored copy of that, right? Just be sure. Let's do that one more time. Store image copy. There it is. So we have a stored copy of the height map. It remembers the parameters for the texturing and the erosion and the shadows and the fog and all that stuff, the lighting. And so when we go back in there, we can go back in there in two ways. If we don't have an animation yet, we would go to Transform and 3D Designer, and it remembers the most recent settings and uses that again. Cancel that. Another way to do it is to go through the timeline in the Transform group here where you see the 3D Designer. And I'm not going to go in there yet. What I want to do is move this to the side and make sure we actually have a animation. Now, I'm showing here something from a prior test or prior animation. I'm going to free this. I don't know if we have an animation right now. I don't think we do. But just to be clear, I'm going to free this animation. And so the only thing we have is one image. And if you want to do any sort of animation, you really need more. You need a sequence of frames. And you're going to need that before you start moving things across those frames. So one of the key things about doing animations in Dogwaffle is to actually have it prepared to hold all these frames that will contain the moving things. The animation is a sequence of frames in which pixels are moving, or shapes or groups of pixels are moving. So what you'll want to do is something like go to the animation menu and create an animation in which you have a couple of choices. One of them is to say, well, how do we initialize the frames that are coming into that animation, and how many are there? Let's do 30 initially. In fact, let's do even fewer. Let's do just 12. And those 12 frames are going to be initialized by either giving them a secondary color black, white. In this case, the secondary color is white. You see it up here also. So it would erase to white, or you could say copy the current frame, which is really what we want in this case, because we are about to move across this scene and we want to have that same scene or that same elevation map be there in each frame, so that the 3D designer can actually go and do its thing to transform it into a beautiful landscape in which we are also going to move. So we need a number of frames of that same content. And we want them to eventually play at 30 frames a second. And you know what? Why not? Let's go with the default 30 frames. So this is a very initial way to do that. And there's some other, there's a default you can make also. That's a nice thing to remember, because I think it defaults to 24 by default. So now we have 30 frames, and you see them right up there. Right? So this is the scrub bar or the animation toolbar. There's a couple of ways to name it. You can have it at the top by default. You can also down here move it at the bottom. So you see that scroll down or go down to the bottom. If you prefer your animation bar at the bottom, that's the way to do it. And then there's a couple of other things. Let me bring it back up so we see the tooltips. This one here is show or hide the film strip, right? So the film strip is this one thing on the right side here that you might not need or want to see if you need more room for this. And that's why you can grab this vertical separator and give it a bit more granularity along this timeline, right? So here is the toggle for seeing the film bar, the whatever we call it here, the film strip. And then there's a couple of controls, and we'll explore those as needed. But what we do have here now is a sequence of individual frames. And we can do a lot of things in terms of animation, even just at these frames. Right-click here, and you'll see some frame editing options. Cutting a frame, copying it, inserting it somewhere else. You can also select a whole group or a block of frames and setting by defining an in marker and an out marker, set in, set out, right? Something like this, for instance, from this frame, right click here and say set in, and then go here, right click and set out. And now you see the blue highlighted section with these 6 frames that are selected as a block. And you could do other things now with that. You could copy or cut this block, delete the block, all sorts of things. We're not going to worry about that yet. Right now, what we'll need is to turn this into an animation of our 3D terrain. And so we have the placeholder, we have the 30 frames, and we can go to the filter in the timeline. So that's right here. By the way, if you ever lose this film strip here, this entire animation toolbar, close the animation control panel. That doesn't mean you've lost the animation. You still have the animation. And what you can do is you can bring it back from the animation menu, animation controls. Right? That brings you back that entire toolbar. All right. So now we're going to use the filter that is called the 3D Designer. So you need to go basically 3 clicks down on this scroll bar here as you select the filters from the timeline. That's this one here, right? As you select the filters, you go 1, 2, 3, and you're in the group called the Transform group. And there you'll see 3D Designer. So now grab 3D Designer, and once again, it remembers the most recent settings that were used in the prior session on the single frame. And so what I'd like to do now is adjust the settings one more time, perhaps the amount of pre-filtering. Do we really need the clouds? Do we want to get a little bit closer? Or do we want to make this scale the scene down here a little bit? Remember, we need a little bit more than what we see. We need this to be bigger than what we can see so that we actually have an option to move across it and see something new during the animation. So the animation could be, for instance, a side mover, right? Where we move from the side, like from this, you can grab this position here. This is the X, Y, and Z, the position. You can click and drag that. Oops, not this one here. Click and drag that, and same thing with the Y. And so here is where you'll see the clouds move also underneath it. And so maybe we want to see a bit more of the clouds. So this is a start position will be here, and then the end position will be here. But we want to see the clouds a little bit more. And so what you'll want to do is to move the clouds in a position where they'll be easier to see at the beginning, and they'll look just so much nicer. So let's say something like this. Let's make them a little bit smaller, and then that way we can actually see more of those. And so, okay, just something like this. Okay, so as we have this position as a starting point, later we'll want to go across that, and you'll see how the clouds are moving a little bit faster because they are closer to us, to the camera, to the observer. We might even move them up even higher. Let's move them up even higher, like so, and they'll just be appearing to move even faster. Now we can still adjust the light a little bit and get the right shadows, and perhaps then get ready for anti-aliased rendering. I'm going to give it just 2 levels for sake of brevity and make it go really fast. But for your final render, you'll want to pump this up to anti-AA level 5, or 4 at least. then if you just need a quick test render, let's leave it off, right? Pre-filter, let's give it a little bit of smoothing there. Anything else? Ambient occlusion, let's see what that does. Makes it a bit dark. Let's see ambient occlusion in additive mode, makes it a bit bright. Let's see, what else do we need? A little bit of specular lighting perhaps, and a little bit darker on the light range, so we see more of the shaded areas that get darker. All right, so let's say this is one more adjustment, maybe the how long those shadows are. All right, let's say this is our rendering and our render setting, and we are essentially ready now to go render that. So I'm going to go click OK, and what happens is that we have our first position, but we might still need to do a little bit of adjustment. So now we are actually in the timeline editor where we will do the actual final animation, right? With the parameters we have just selected. If you want to get back in there, use the thumb wheel on your mouse and middle click, right? And then when you middle click on that, it gets you back into the parameters. And then you can OK that. And so now you can think about setting up the animation by going along this scroll bar, and you see every single frame of your animation. You can select them here too, but you really want to set them here to indicate not which frame you want to look at, but which frame you want to set in the animation here in the timeline. So let's go to the first frame, and what you can do is now adjust the position. Right, now you can do that in two different places. You can also adjust the angle. If you do that here, that will change your angle with the left button. And with the right button, it will change your zoom. You can zoom in sideways, dragging the mouse sideways. So that's good if you want to do an animation like this, where you're kind of looking at it from a side angle and rotating around it, right? What you want to do, though, what we want to do in our first animation is a bit different. We don't want to change the angle. We just want to kind of fly over that. So let's make sure we kind of have this angle that we want, and now use these parameters down here. These are the ones you can keyframe. Right, so we're going to keyframe at least one of them to make it go from one to another. Now this one here is the Z distance. Don't go too close, but also don't go too far. We need to have a little bit of margin around so we can actually move without seeing the edge. And so go this one here. That will allow us to go in this direction. That's exactly the one we're looking for. There's another one here with the X value. That would be a side slider, right, if you need a view going sideways. All right, so let's say we want this angle here. Let's go find the right spot around this. This is the end position. This is the start position. There's a little bit of an angle. You can see here the edge of the terrain. So let's see if we can adjust that a little bit. Make it go kind of parallel. There you go. That's close enough. And now move it down so we don't see the edge, but we are very close to that. There you go. So now we are at the first position for our animation. Keyframe that, right? Create a key. That now has a little yellow dinghy here, the dingle hopper. And then you go to the last frame and take that same slider, the y-axis, in the other direction. And so let's say we want to go about this much, right? And keyframe that. Now we have a positional change going from the right end to from the left end to the right end of the timeline, and causing the position to change in this direction. Now maybe we also want to change something else, a little bit of I don't know, a side view. So what we want to do is perhaps wobble our head or something like that. Let's say if we are an eagle soaring over these skies, we may want to look a little bit to the left or look a little bit to the right. So add a little bit of a movement like this, but just very subtle, okay, and keyframe that. And so now we are still moving in this direction, but we're also kind of wobbling around a little bit. So that's the kind of thing you want to do if you have a reason to do that. and like, let's say you're mimicking, let's say you're pretending to be a hot air balloon, or even just a birthday balloon that's being twirled around. There's a lot of turbulence, right? And so as you're flying through the air, you'll see the air take you around and for a spin there. Now, if you want this thing to be happening earlier, you can drag it. You can grab this yellow marker that keyframe and put it on a different place in the timeline. So the earlier it happens, the faster you'll get to that, right? And then if you delay it, it'll be later until it reaches that. So you can, for instance, you can make it slow down and then speed up very quickly. It moves to that new position in just a few frames, right? So that's another thing you can do there, is play a little bit with the timeline as you reposition those keyframes. All right, so that's it. Then we go render that. Let's go apply. Now, before you hit apply, you want to make sure you have the save undo checked. And that's because we are not a professional yet, right? If we know what we're doing and we can trust that we know exactly what it's going to render, it's going to be perfect, we don't need the undo. And it takes a little bit of time and it takes quite a bit of disk space to do the undo, but it's not that bad. It's certainly worth having it. It's better to actually have. The time it takes to save into the undo, like keep a safe copy of the frame before the render, is minimal compared to the time it will take to just render that in the first place. So make sure you have the save undo checked and then click apply. And while it's rendering, if you say, oh, that's not it, you can stop and undo, right? Because we did save the undo. Now you can go and say, oh, wait, I needed this a little bit earlier. There, let's go now. Apply. All right, so here we have our render happening. And that's our first animation going across the terrain. Okay, it's a bit wobbly, has a bit of noises and side effects because we didn't use the very highest anti-aliasing. So let's go undo that. And so if this is exactly the parameters we want, let's go middle click on this to see it again with the parameters and increase the level of anti-aliasing to the max, right? And then click out of that and render again. Now you're re-rendering the exact same sequence, but look how long it takes now, because it's doing the anti-aliasing. Now, mind you, it's doing this on the GPU, so it is much faster than it would be in a pure software render on the CPU, right? I mean, it's still software, but it's accelerated on the graphics processor. And so that's going to be your final render. And just for sake of brevity, I'm going to cancel that, stop it, undo, middle click, and say no, maybe just 3 or 2 level of anti-aliasing is good enough. Let's do 3. Let's do without the ambient occlusion and see what we get with that. Okay, apply that. So now it's a little bit faster, but mind you, still takes a while to render this sequence of imagery. And then once we have that, we have essentially our first completed animation as a flyover. Okay, so this is a flyover, a 3D terrain that's being rendered as we fly over. There are many different types of renders and even many different types of flyovers that I can imagine. This is one where we actually haven't produced the rendering yet. We are producing it right now on the fly as we're flying over it. Right, but there could be another type of flyover, and I'll cover that in the next tutorial. This one here will pretty much finish for now. This is what we needed to do. We can call this quits. We can say, okay, we are done. Mission accomplished. Perhaps one thing we can do is go to the animation and store this animation, store to disk, just so we have a snapshot, a safe copy. We can see play. And you see what happens when we change the angle a little bit. The clouds seem to be moving forward again, right? Because they're closer and they move at a different perspective, in a different direction, depending on where the camera moves. All right, so that's what will be our first intro. From there, you're not quite done necessarily. There's a lot of things you can do, and I'll just finish by adding a animation of motion prediction module, because maybe I said, well, that's good, but I want it to be slower. And so the motion prediction module can often be used to time stretch it. Let's give it a dry run with, let's say, level 3 or 4, and no refinement pass on this test, and just see what that looks like. And that might be okay, but be prepared for some artifacts at times. Let's say with this, let's go and call this. This will now turn from 30 frames into 130 something frames. And we now have Perhaps the last frame we can delete, and there we go. There, from here on, we have a couple of frames that are good. So I'll delete the bad ones. At the beginning, there's too much movement, and you see the motion prediction module was not set up with the right parameters to track that far of a movement. So I'll delete. I'll set the in marker here. I'll go and find the place that looks better from about here. Here we still see some distortion, and from here it's pretty good. Out marker, delete all that. Right click on that, cut the block, or delete it altogether. You'll do a cut if you want to paste it somewhere else, like insert block somewhere else. But delete block will just delete those frames, and that's fine. So now we have a sequence like this, and that's our first animation. Thanks for watching.